Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. As we close in on Indiana primary election day 2024, I return to the top of the ticket. The United States Senate seat being vacated by Trump sycophant and denim shirt aficionado, gubernatorial candidate Mike Braun, is up for election this November. Hoosier Republicans threw all their weight behind 3rd District Congressman Jim Banks, somehow an even more pathetic Trump bootlicker than Braun, clearing the field for the insurrection-supporting, Russia-loving MAGA dickweasel. Indiana Democrats, on the other hand, have a contested primary. In one corner, former state representative and longtime lobbyist Marc Carmichael. In the other corner, psychologist Valerie McRae. I liked my last two-part episode so much I thought I'd do another, presenting each of the candidates before you head to the polls. I spoke with Dr. McRae in the previous episode. Now, I turn to her primary challenger, Marc Carmichael. Quoting his website, Marc is a lifelong Indiana resident and a Notre Dame graduate who was elected to the Indiana House when he easily defeated the sitting Republican House Speaker in a 60% Republican district. Carmichael defended his seat twice before stepping down to become the Director of Governmental Affairs for the Indiana Gas Company. In 1999, Carmichael took over as president of the Indiana Beverage Alliance, a statewide trade association for Indiana's family-owned beer distributors, and retired from that position in 2020. His entry into the race was driven by a deeply personal concern: the potential impact of the fall of Roe v. Wade on his granddaughters. This pivotal moment galvanized his commitment to fight for reproductive rights and ensure equitable access to health care for women across the nation. Carmichael's dedication to this cause stems not only from political conviction but also from a heartfelt desire to safeguard the well-being of future generations. Despite facing fundraising disparities and the daunting prospect of challenging an established incumbent, Carmichael remains undeterred. Drawing upon his past electoral victories, including a historic triumph over former Indiana House Speaker J. Roberts Daley, he exemplifies resilience in the face of adversity. For Carmichael, the path to victory lies in grassroots mobilization and the unwavering support of the community. Beyond his advocacy for reproductive rights, Carmichael's platform encompasses a range of pressing issues, from gun violence prevention to climate action and healthcare equity. Embracing an old-school approach to governance, he emphasizes the importance of bipartisanship and collaboration in addressing the nation's most pressing challenges. In this conversation, Marc and I talk about his background, why he jumped back into electoral politics after so long out of the game, and why lobbyists sometimes get a bad rap. We'll discuss his political influences past and present before jumping into the successes and failures of the Biden administration. He and I revisit some bad decisions made by recent Democratic senators, talk about what he would have done differently, and I get his positions on all the big issues. Finally, we talk some shit about Jim Banks. But first, I could use a hand. 2024 has proven to be far more difficult than many of us expected, and I was expecting a trying year. After my 19-year-old son passed away in January, the day-in, day-out grind of handyman work just didn't seem important anymore, so I doubled down on Who's Left in an effort to shed more light on state and local politics, where Indiana's Republican supermajority and their financial benefactors enact policies that ensure more Hoosier parents know the grief of losing a child. By allowing guns to flood our communities, bullying queer youth, and poisoning our environment, or simply running the next generation out of the state with their draconian policies. I've received an outpouring of support. Our subscriber base has grown tremendously, and we're picking up paid subscribers all the time. I've been able to publish more frequently, learn new skills, and expand beyond audio into video podcasting. But the cushion has run out. My wife and I have exhausted our savings, so I've had to don the Carhartt once again, returning to work scraping and sanding, painting and priming, maybe doing a little unauthorized plumbing. Working on this project whenever I can. I'd much rather devote my time to this and to you, but I can only give this project the attention it truly deserves with your help. I will continue to work to highlight Indiana's bad actors so we can replace them with more empathetic leadership, and also shine the spotlight on the activists, organizations, and elected officials who are doing the hard work to build a more just, equitable, and compassionate Indiana for the next generation of Hoosiers. And I'll take on Democrats, too, when they put their donors over their voters, when they talk out of both sides of their mouths, and when they fail to push back against GOP authoritarian extremism with the necessary urgency and tenacity. The party is a tool we can use to achieve our goals. It serves us. We do not serve it. I will go deep to provide information and analysis you won't get anywhere else in the Hoosier state. I'm not motivated by the money, but everything costs money. Web hosting, equipment, editing software, travel to meet with other activists and organizers, and most of all, time. I need your financial support with a paid subscription over at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction and help keep the refrigerator stocked for my ravenous 16-year-old. And while the best way to help this project is a financial contribution, if you can't afford it at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. Follow us on social media at facebook.com/HoosLeft. That's HOOS left. I'm also now on Blue Sky at the same handle, and personally at ScottRog78, that is SCOTTROG78, on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, and on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. Prefer a visual medium? I'm now posting full episodes of the pod on YouTube and clips on TikTok. The handle on both of those is at HoosLeft. Please subscribe. But most importantly, share our message. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Nobody is coming to save us. We must be our own saviors. With your investment, a full-time Who's Left could look like new content every day. Full coverage of the 2024 election cycle in Indiana and beyond. And zooming out to see how the networks acting in our state function nationally and even globally. And even though I'm here asking you for money, I do not plan on paywalling any content because, as best-selling author and owner of a master's degree from IU, Sarah Kenzier says, it's not cool to paywall political content in a political crisis. I believe in open access to information, and your support helps make that knowledge freely available to all Hoosiers. But I desperately need your contributions in order to keep bringing you all the content you deserve. So please, before this interview, pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. To those who have contributed already, my sincere thanks. And to everybody, thanks for listening. Now here is my conversation with Marc Carmichael. Marc Carmichael, welcome to the Who's Left podcast. Thank you.
Scott, thanks a lot. Glad to be here.
So, introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell us a little bit about your background, your qualifications.
Okay. My name is Marc Carmichael, and I'm running for the United States Senate seat here in Indiana, the open seat created by Mike Braun stepping down to run for governor. And the Republican will be Jim Banks, who I'm just confident I can beat. I grew up in the Muncie area, and I went to a county high school where we played all the sports because we had to. And then on a local scholarship, I went to Notre Dame and graduated there in 1972. And then I worked for Notre Dame for another 4 years. in a couple of various capacities. And then I was hired by the local Budweiser distributor to become their operations manager, which I did for several years. And then my wife and I decided to move back to Muncie with our young children and start a family. And well, actually, we didn't start a family; we had a family. But it's there that I decided to run for Democratic politics, and I came from a family of school teachers. My dad was a school teacher. My sisters taught. My brother taught for a while. Aunts, uncles, cousins, just everywhere I look, because we're in Ball State territory. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to help any way I could, because I felt like public schools were being shortchanged by the Republican-controlled Indiana General Assembly, just like they are today.
Yeah, wow, it's only gotten worse, right?
Deja vu all over again. So anyway, it gets worse. So in 1986, I decided to run for the Indiana House of Representatives, and the problem there was that my opponent was going to be the Republican Speaker of the Indiana House, a guy by the name of J. Roberts Daley, who had no love for public schools. And he was in a gerrymandered district, which was about 60% Republican. And certainly no one thought I had a chance. Many people tried to talk me out of it, but I didn't know any better. So I printed up a little brochure and went to the county fair, Delaware County Fair in July, stood at the Democrat tent all week long, handed out my little brochure, met people, met Democrats that I'd never met before, because I was coming to this for the first time, kind of out of nowhere. And so they were kind of interested, to kick the tires and see what I was all about. So after the fair was over, I started going door to door in Muncie. And because I was a new person to the game, I started in the Democrat precincts, because they didn't know me either. Mm-hmm. And we divided the number of days possible into the number of precincts. And so I was able to spend about 2 evenings in each precinct, starting in July, going door to door. And, it was hot, muggy, a lot of dogs. You learn quickly that there's a lot of dogs. Anyway, I kept at it, kept going door to door, a couple hours after work in the evenings on Saturdays. Would go to various events in Indianapolis put on by the House Democrat Caucus to meet other candidates and to meet interested people about looking at what the Democrat candidates had to offer. And sometime in September, the Indiana State Teachers Association approached me and said, we kind of like what we see. You're really working hard, and we'd like to throw in with you and see if we can beat the speaker. And I thought, well, that's great. Let's try that. So anyway, that meant more people, more organization, more volunteers. And so we had lots of teachers working, going door to door, putting signs in their yards, volunteering to work at the polls on election day. And so we went into election day firing on all cylinders. And at the end of the day, we had beaten the speaker by 18 points.
Wow. Impressive.
59 to 41. And he won 4 precincts total. And so it shocked everyone. It led the newscast for like 48 hours that the speaker had lost to this guy out of nowhere. And the Democrats that year went from starting that election with 39 seats in the House, and we ended up with 48. So we gained 9 seats that election. And then 2 years later, we went to a 50-50 tie. And then 2 years after that, we took the majority and were able to draw the maps after the 1990 elections. We drew the maps in 91, and we were fortunate enough to draw the maps again in 2001. So there was a 20-year period there where the Democrats were able to maintain almost a 50-50 split in the Indiana House. Sometimes they were in the majority, sometimes not. But it all started in that 1986 election year when I beat the speaker. And there were other great victories that night, too. People upset incumbents all over the state of Indiana.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, that was a minute ago. It's been over 30 years since you've held office, almost 30 since you last ran. You're 74 years old. Why is now the time to jump back in the game? And why Marc Carmichael instead of Dr. Valerie McRae to take on Jim Banks for Senate?
Well, because I'm the one that can beat Jim Banks. You know, I mean, that's the goal. The goal is to beat Jim Banks because he's too radical.
Yes.
He's too extreme, even for Indiana. And so it's critical. We only get this one chance, you know, because if he were to win and become an incumbent Republican senator in Indiana, we'd be hard pressed to get rid of him. And so I factored all that in. I thought, you know, we can't let Banks go to the Senate. Somebody's got to beat him. I can beat him. And so here I am, you know, yeah, I'm 74. Yeah, it's been a while since I ran. But, you know, it's like riding a bike. You just get right back on and pick up where you left off. And so in 96, I ran again for Congress.
Yeah.
Because the Democrats needed someone to fill that race in East Central Indiana against David McIntosh, who had won 2 years earlier against Joe Hogsett. But Hogsett got caught up in that Gingrich 94 sweep, that red wave that swept across the country. And so when 96 rolled around, Joe told me that he didn't want to run again. And but Frank O'Bannon was going to be on the ballot running for governor for the first time. And so someone had to run that race, you know, and help Frank. And so I agreed to run that race and had a good time. Learned a lot, you know, went to Washington, D.C., learned how to do the circuit, pleading your case with all the political directors that have heard it all before.
Yeah.
You know, how you're the best thing since sliced bread. Oh, yeah. But, you know, it was a great experience. I did get beat. But I know that Frank won some counties in East Central Indiana that they had not expected to win. And I felt good about that. You know, I felt like maybe we helped do that. Then I fell right back into my job at Indiana Gas Company, where I was the director of political affairs. And I did that until 99. And then the beer distributors of Indiana approached me and said, you know, our executive director is going to retire. And they knew about the time I'd spent at United Beverage in South Bend. And I had carried some alcohol legislation when I was a legislator. And so they said, would you be interested? I said, oh, heck yes. And so for 21 years, I had like the best job in America. I represented family-owned businesses in Indiana, all over the state, who provided great jobs for their employees, great benefits. They were great stewards of their hometowns. No, they never said no. I mean, that's the thing about these people, is that if you ask us to sponsor something, we did. And so I was really happy to be that job. And 21 years, I was 70 years old, and it was time, you know, for new blood, time for me to move on. And so I retired, and I bought an old wooden speedboat, old Chris Craft, 1946 Chris Craft, and I'm in the process of restoring it. When Braun announces that he's going to step down to run for governor, Banks announces that he's going to run for the Senate, And then I decided, well, the boat's going to have to wait. And so the boat is, I'm about 3 months short of having the boat done, but it's covered up and I'm in full campaign mode once again. And just certain that because of the circumstances, because of Roe v. Wade and Banks's position on that, he's in favor of a federal ban with no exceptions, really. If you press him on it, he doesn't want any exceptions. I don't know where he is right now, but his preference is a federal ban with no exceptions. And he even proposed legislation that you could arrest a woman for leaving her state to receive an abortion in another state.
Wow.
So he's very extreme on that issue. I want to ban assault weapons. He's a lapdog for the NRA. If we're ever going to make any progress on gun violence, it's going to be with Democrats. It's not going to be with Republicans. The NRA owns them, and so they can't ever budge on the NRA's position on guns. I want to attack climate change. Banks is a climate denier. He claims it's a liberal hoax while we set records every month.
Yeah, liberal hoax. It was 87 degrees on May 2nd yesterday.
Yeah, so,
that's not normal.
I'm in favor of Medicare for all, so we get universal health care and affordable housing. We've got a problem where, as you know, because of COVID, the rates went way down. People refinanced. Now they're in their homes at a much lower rate, and they don't want to sell. So we don't have any stock for people to buy. People that want to buy a home can't find any, and the rates are now much higher. So we've got a housing crisis. We've got a medical crisis, a climate crisis, a assault weapons or a gun violence crisis, and a women's rights crisis. It just adds up. And Banks is on the wrong side of all those issues. I can't wait. I just can't wait to get out there and have a comparison, a head-to-head, and say, okay, what are you looking for? You're looking for a bomb thrower out of the Chaos Caucus in Jim Banks, or you're looking for somebody that's done this before, somebody that went to the legislature as a freshman in the minority with Ball State University in his district. And they're looking, they got their wish list as we go into a budget session. They just lost the Speaker of the House, and they got a freshman legislator in the minority. And I just had to roll up my sleeves, go across the aisle, work with Republicans, and get stuff done. And that's really the way I look at it is I want to go to Washington, roll up my sleeves, work with Todd Young and other willing Republicans to get things done for Indiana and for the United States of America, and, quit this culture clash stuff that is not getting us anywhere. The Republicans in the U.S. House cannot govern, and they're never going to be governed because they all come from gerrymandered districts, and they're scared to death. They're just paralyzed with political fear, and they need to stand aside. And, Democrats are going to have to do, once again, the heavy lifting because we cannot afford any more tax cuts for the rich. And that's the only thing Republicans can agree on is another tax
that's true.
for the rich. So, Banks and his ilk need to get out of the way and let people get in there who want to do the job. And I think that I'm that type of a person. And I think more importantly, that I am the ideal candidate to beat him. So I can't wait to get started.
So, Marc, you spent quite a long time as a lobbyist. We talked about it for a little bit there. First for, Indiana Gas, fossil fuel company, and then for the beer distributors lobby. And I saw a poll recently that only 6% of Americans say lobbyists have high or very high honesty and ethical standards. Now, you got into this a little bit, like why you enjoyed working, especially with the beer distributors group. But just real quick, why why should listeners not say, "Ooh, lobbyist"? That sounds corrupt. Why are you, in fact, an honest, ethical broker?
Well, I am honest, and I was honest. And, there are rules and guidelines as to how you can lobby and how you need to report your lobbying efforts. But another thing is that when I was at Indiana Gas, yes, I was their registered lobbyist, but I was also in charge of economic development. I was also in charge of our marketing at the local level. I had 14 people working for me who were trying to bring economic development to the Indiana Gas territory. I mean, it's kind of a selfish thing. You're trying to grow business and housing in your market. So anyway, yes, during the legislative session, when the legislature was in session, and even when they were not in session, I was our registered lobbyist. But it wasn't the only thing I did. But it also, that job allowed me to be around economic development in a way that I never would have been around any other way. The beer distributors was a little bit different because they were scattered all over the state of Indiana in their own communities, and I was their lobbyist when the legislature was in session. But I also got to work with them on local issues to help them with small business issues. And being at the State House every day is a learning experience. You visit with other lobbyists, you visit with the general public, you visit with legislators, and you've learned a lot more every day at the State House than you would learn not being there. So I know that lobbyists have maybe a negative connotation, but the truth is they're just trying to do a good job for their clients. And I tell people all the time, if you're a living, breathing human being, somewhere you have a lobbyist. If you belong to any association, any group, whether it's environmental or whether it's a trade association or whatever, if you're AARP, it doesn't matter. You've got a lobbyist, and you should be glad you have one, because then you don't have to go to the State House and fight your battles. You have a lobbyist who's fighting your battles for you. So we do the work because we like to be there, and we do it so everybody doesn't have to show up. So, I've enjoyed it. It's been a great life. Made a lot of friends around the state, and wouldn't have traded for anything.
So, you've rubbed a lot of elbows over the years. You got to meet a lot of people in local politics, national politics too, and you ran for Congress. Who are some of your heroes and influences in the political realm? Maybe locally and also like historically.
Well, that's easy. In Indiana, Lee Hamilton and Dick Lugar, one on each side of the aisle. No showboating, no grandstanding, just doing the job year after year, making us proud, trying to make the world a better place, a safer place. So I really would like to think that I could go and be like those two gentlemen. And then at the historical level, I think there's no comparison to Abraham Lincoln and holding the Union together at great personal sacrifice. So anyway, that's the short of it is those three gentlemen are my political heroes.
Okay, what about potential colleagues? Say, you win this primary, you go on and you send Banks back to Virginia, where he really lives, and you're in the Senate. Who do you look forward to working with? Who do you maybe mold yourself after?
Well, I've told people before, the first thing I want to do if I'm elected to the Senate is walk into Todd Young's office and sit down and say, okay, like it or not, we've got each other, but what are you working on and what can I help with? That would be, to me, a great start. And then I want to get to know Bernie Sanders better. I want to get to I like his approach. I like the things he cares about, and those two, that'd be my first two on each side of the aisle. Todd Young on one side and Bernie Sanders on the other.
Well, I'll tell you, you don't hear those two in the same breath very often.
Well, but I'm kind of eclectic that way,
Yeah.
Look at the artwork behind me. I just a little bit of everything.
Oh, yeah. No, I love it. So staying in Washington there, generally speaking, what is the Biden administration doing well, and what are they doing poorly?
I think the thing they're doing well is they're just doing the job that needs to be done every day. There's no dumpster fire every day. It's just, and there's plenty of stuff going on around the world that takes a steady hand and experience. And Biden has been on that world stage as a senator and a vice president, and he knows these people personally, and that's critical to know who you're dealing with, what their personalities are like. But I think that just a steady hand on the rudder in a time of turmoil, not overreacting, not shooting from the hip. And I think that he's the right guy in the right place at the right time. Now, what's he not doing well? They're not telling a great story about everything that they're getting done and have gotten done. And when I drive, and we do a lot of driving in this campaign, when I drive through all those construction sites and I see all those people working, building those roads and those bridges, and I just think, man, what a great sight to see all those high-paying jobs that Biden and his administration have helped bring. And then I wonder who they're voting for. Are they voting for Joe Biden or are they voting for Trump? And I kind of want to stop the car and get out, and go over and ask them, hey, you guys are working 60 hours a week, and you're making more money than ever before in your life. And in my opinion, it's thanks to the Democrats. Who are you voting for? So anyway, I think they've done a poor job of, and of course, Trump's rhetoric is second to none. So he sucks all the air out of the room.
He certainly does. Look.
Well, it's hard to separate when you're up against a pathological liar. I mean, you spend all your time just correcting the lies, and then you don't have time to say anything good about yourself. But I think Biden's doing a lot of good things that don't get the attention they deserve because Trump just, like I said, just sucks the air out of the room.
Yeah. So one thing I would say maybe the Biden administration is struggling with is going on right now, and his steadfast support for the far-right Israeli Netanyahu government with their continuing ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Do you kind of share my concerns in that regard?
Oh, yeah, it's genocide. And I'm quite convinced that when this is over, Netanyahu and others will be arrested and charged with war crimes and probably convicted. Biden goes back a long way with the state of Israel and their right to defend themselves. And I think he sees it as maybe he's the only one who can try and turn Netanyahu around. He might think that the only way to do this is to just try and stay close in an effort to shut this down. But it's embarrassing. It's horrific. And so you're right. It's right now probably his Achilles heel. If he doesn't, if things don't turn around by November, it could bring him down. So I don't know whether he's showing political courage or stupidity, but he's sure hanging in there. I just think that any ally that we provide aid to needs to agree to adhere to the Geneva Convention. If you can't do that, then you don't deserve our support. And I don't think there's any doubt that Israel in the West Bank has committed crimes. In Gaza commits crimes on a daily basis. I mean, they brought this on themselves with their treatment of the Palestinian people and their refusal to accept a two-state solution. So, and then how many billions of dollars have we spent with Israel's defense to make sure that something like October 7th never happened?
Yeah.
And then they let it happen. This is wrong. And I think that our relationship with Israel will never be the same. But I do have to admit that Biden is hanging in there. I just hope that at the end of the day that he gets something out of Netanyahu that nobody else could have gotten.
Yeah, that's boy, every day that goes by though, just
I know
more and more.
It's awful. It's awful.
All right, I wanted to move on to a couple roadblocks we've hit in the Senate over the last several years. So back in 2009, during the session that wound up producing the Affordable Care Act, a public health care option was on the table, but scuttled by one vote from Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman. Do you support either a public health option or, going even further, Medicare for all? And would you push for that in the Senate?
Yes, Medicare for all.
Yes.
It's time, past time. So yeah, I'm all in.
Love it. Good to hear it.
Yeah.
Likewise, just a couple years ago in 2022, Senators Manchin and Sinema essentially vetoed the most ambitious parts of President Biden's Build Back Better plan, like child care, paid family leave, the expansion of the child tax credit, earned income tax credit, all sorts of good stuff. So they say they supported these things, but did not support them sufficiently to override the filibuster. Would you have supported those parts of Biden's agenda, and would you vote to change the filibuster rules to get that done?
Yes and yes. The filibuster has to go. It's causes too many problems, and it just keeps us from doing the things we need to do. Gives people something to hide behind. No, it needs to go. Just like the Electoral College needs to go.
Yeah.
So a lot of changes that need to happen that are only going to happen with a solid Democrat majority to get things done for the American people besides tax cuts for the rich.
Yes, I asked about the filibuster because the top issue, and you mentioned this back at the top, is reproductive freedom for women, and I think we're probably both in agreement then that the only way we're going to be able to overcome that Dobbs decision is with legislation, and the only way that legislation is going to get through is by eliminating the filibuster. Yes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And who knows? There may be a blue wave big enough that the Democrats can get that done. It's a sneaky blue wave out there. I don't think the Republicans have any idea what's going to hit them in November.
We've got the message. We just don't have good messaging, right?
Yeah. Well, as I talk and travel, the pent-up demand is there on so many levels, whether it be reproductive freedoms, whether it be gun violence, or whether it be the climate, or healthcare, housing, and you just goes on and on and on because the Republicans don't do anything. And so it all builds up, for Democrats to have to do it. And every once in a while, the dam breaks.
Yeah, it is. It's like a log jam. Yeah.
I think that this is the kind of election. I'm not saying it's a Watergate type of an election, but it's going to be bigger than people think, and it's going to catch a lot of Republicans off guard. They will have misjudged it, and that's why I think I can beat Banks. It's that kind of a year. He's that kind of a candidate, and I'm that kind of a candidate. It's an easy choice. It's just getting the word out, and getting the Democrat National Committee to commit the resources to get it done. Because if he's sitting on $5 million, then I need their help. So
they just had that huge fundraiser not that long ago in New York City, and Obama was there, and Clinton was there, and a bunch of celebrities were there, and I guess they raised like $25 million in one night. And I think it's easier to drive turnout from the bottom up than it is from the top down, but I'm not a, paid political consultant.
Well, you need it. You need all of it.
Yeah.
You need the ground game and you need the airwaves. Not like the carpet bombing that we've seen from the Republican gubernatorial candidate.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But the last couple of weeks of the campaign, you need to be on the air. And in the meantime, you need to be on social media, and you need to be going, to all the events and fairs and parades you can get to. But it's everything. There's no one thing that wins it. It's everything you can think of and more.
Let me rapid fire you here through a couple more questions, because I know you got to run, Mark. You talked about working on a ban on military-style assault weapons, and you will fight for a national red flag law. How are we going to get past the NRA and all their staunch Republican support?
Well, I mean, we just have to elect Democrats. There's just no question about it. I told a group the other night, if you care at all about gun violence, you cannot vote for a Republican. They're not going to touch it. They can't. They're owned by the NRA. They can't get out of their own primary without the support of the NRA and Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So, if that matters to you, you need to be voting for Democrats, and we'll get it done. If you can do assault weapons, a universal background check, and a national red flag law, that's a start. It's going to be, there's 400 million guns out there, thanks to the NRA and the Republican Party. So it's going to take a while to turn this around, but you got to start, and you got to start with Democrats, because Republicans can't touch it.
Yeah. Things that we don't have a long time to turn around. Climate change. You're looking at a 6-year Senate term. I'd say by the end of those 6 years, if we don't have real progress in getting emissions down towards zero, I worry about the planet.
Sure.
What are we going to do in the next 6 years to get to save this planet for our children?
Well, obviously, we're going to do wind. We're going to do solar. We're going to do nuclear. We're going to do everything we can think of that's not a fossil fuel. The thing I'm concerned about is the drain that AI is going to have on our electrical grid. I keep reading where AI takes so much power that we haven't worked into our forecasting, that how are we going to meet that demand at the same time that we clean up the environment? So it's going to be a delicate balancing act. But anyway, Democrats can do it. Republicans can't. Republicans are tied to the fossil fuel industry. Again, I keep coming back to, it's kind of a one-trick pony. If you want to get anything done, you're going to have to elect Democrats and just let us do the job. Let us agree on things. And there's going to be compromises, but still we're going to be making progress. So, now it can be done. but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, they've got nothing but fear. And along those lines, like for I don't know, my entire adult lifetime, it seems like they've been ginning up racism and xenophobia regarding the
Sure.
U.S.-Mexico border, right?
That's all they got.
Yeah. So what are your views on the border, immigration reform, pathways to citizenship, border security, all that good stuff?
It can all be done. It can all be worked out. There's different parts of the Rio Grande that lend themselves to different types of security measures.
Mm-hmm.
Even sometimes a wall is not out of the question. But it's a multiple phase solution. We need more money for judges and courts.
Mm-hmm.
We need to take care of the dreamers. We can't turn our back on them. That bill that everybody was crowing about didn't take care of the dreamers. You got to take care of the dreamers, and they deserve to stay here and be citizens. I mean, think about it. How much better off we are as a country that allows immigration than as a country that tries to shut off its borders and then begins to start shrinking. I mean, everybody's population growth is shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
Young people don't want to bring children into this world, and who can blame them? So if we're going to grow our economy, and we've got a lot of jobs that people are willing to do that apparently we aren't and our kids aren't. So, we need all of the immigration we can handle in a way that's both fair and enforceable. But again, Democrats will hammer this out. It needs to be done, and Democrats know it too. But it'll be fair, and it'll be enforceable, and we'll put the money behind it. It won't just be a scare tactic. Republicans don't want a solution. They just want a scare tactic.
Right. They had one on the board, theoretically, and voted against it.
And if what Trump is saying is that, the rapists and jailed convicts and terrorists, and if they're pouring across the border, apparently he was okay for that to continue for another year, while he had an issue to campaign on. So no, it'll take Democrats to fix this problem too.
Yeah. Republicans don't. Yeah, they like to demagogue on it, but they don't want to solve it because then they can't gin up fear about it.
That's right.
Marc, why don't you give us the final big pitch here? Tell us why you are the man to beat Jim Banks, and where can we find out more information about you?
Thanks, Scott. I am the guy to beat Jim Banks, and that's what this is all about. It's about beating Jim Banks, who is our best candidate for the Democrats to beat Jim Banks, and I'm it. I've got the experience beating the speaker. I've got the experience being a public speaker. I've testified in hundreds of committees, on various issues, and I can take Jim Banks on the issues. I'm looking forward to it. He's loaded the cannons, and I'm ready to swing him around and start firing at him. And you can find me at markforindiana.com. That's Marc with a C for Indiana.com. We could use help. We could use volunteers. And we could use your donations. It's expensive to run for the United States Senate, but I sure appreciate the time. I do have to run to another event, and I'm thrilled we finally got this in. So it's great talking with you.
Yeah, Marc, I cannot tell you enough how much I appreciate you working with me and being patient and getting this thing done here.
We got it.
I appreciate it so much.
You're
best
welcome.
of luck Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, sir. All right, bye-bye now.
Bye.
Once again, that was candidate for U.S. Senate, Marc Carmichael. Having heard from both Democratic candidates, here are my thoughts on this race. First of all, the stakes. Republican nominee Jim Banks is a far-right, Trump-humping, MAGA extremist ideologue who shouldn't even be allowed into the United States Senate chamber on a tour, let alone voted into office. Let me run through just some of his greatest hits, with an assist from a Daily Kos profile published last August titled Fanatical Republican Extremist of the Day. Banks was first elected to Congress back in 2016, riding the Mango Mussolini's coattails to Washington. Prior to that, he entered the political arena in the 2010 Tea Party wave and served 6 years in the Indiana State Senate. In his time at the State House, he voted against the Medicaid expansion, co-sponsored a bill to drug test welfare recipients, a massive waste of money meant only to humiliate, another bill to defund Planned Parenthood in Indiana, and helped pass an extreme anti-abortion bill requiring women to bury or cremate fetal remains that was quickly overturned by the courts. He is also a tool of HoosLeft arch-nemesis ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, bringing forth anti-union quote-unquote right-to-work legislation on behalf of his corporate masters. In December 18th, 2019, Banks voted to let his daddy Trump skate in his first impeachment trial for attempting to extort Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. January 10th, 2020. After Congressman Ilhan Omar mentions in an interview that she still has PTSD from her time as a child refugee in Somalia, Jim Banks comes along to minimize her suffering and try to pretend that she's not being honest about her condition and that her remarks were, quote, offensive to our nation's veterans, end quote. How? I don't know. December 10th, 2020, Banks signs his name to an amicus brief to the Supreme Court begging them to overturn the results of the same 2020 election in which he won re-election. No, not his result, just his Lord and Savior Donald J. Trump's legitimate loss. January 6th, 2021. Banks votes for the objection to the Electoral College's votes in the 2020 election, casting his lot with the insurrectionists who overran the Capitol earlier that day. 1 week later, Banks votes against the second impeachment of Donald Trump because, attempting coups and killing cops is just fine, apparently. Throughout 21 and 22, Banks votes against the Equality Act that would provide workplace protections for LGBTQ Americans, H.R. 1, a bill created to prevent the corruption of money in politics and protect voter access to the ballot box, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act because guns have more rights than women, I guess. November 5th, 2021, Banks votes against H.R. 3684, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Supplemental funding for infant formula, pro-life there, champ. May 18th, 2022, Banks votes against H.R. 350, the Domestic Violence Prevention Act, because these days a plank of the Republican Party is ostensibly domestic terror. H.R. 7688, a bill which would help prevent gas companies from gouging customers on prices. House Amendment 262, which would require the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and Secretary of Defense to publish a report on the infiltration of American law enforcement by neo-Nazis and white supremacists, offer measures to be taken to remove them from their ranks, and prevent further infiltration by others. The Right to Contraception Act, which codifies the right of Americans to have access to birth control. H.R. 7946, which was meant to honor the promise to grant citizenship to immigrants who served in the United States Armed Forces. Banks is one of 67 Republicans who co-sponsored the Life at Conception Act, which would ban both abortion and birth control federally, and one of 70 Republicans to vote for an amendment that would cut all U.S. funding to support Ukraine because he's a Putin-loving authoritarian lapdog. Just last month, Banks, who founded the ridiculous anti-woke caucus in Congress, was accompanied on a multi-stop tour of the state by the stochastic terrorist and Libs of TikTok creator Chaya Raichik, perhaps to celebrate her recent addition to the Southern Poverty Law Center's extremist watch list. I hope this detailed rundown clearly illustrates the kind of dangerous individual we're dealing with. Banks must be kept out of the United States Senate. Period. The two Democratic candidates I've just profiled would each be infinitely better than Banks, though to be fair, a punch in the dick would be better than Banks. The question for Hoosier voters with a conscience is, who is most able to defeat this heinous scumbag come November? Though they might not have been on the Indiana Democratic Senate candidate A list at the beginning of this cycle, I couldn't be more impressed personally with both Mr. Carmichael and Dr. McCrae after speaking with them. First, let me tell you a little story about Marc to show you what kind of guy he is. We originally recorded on March 14th and had a series of technical difficulties. For the most part, I've not had major problems with my podcast hosting service, a few things here and there, but our computers just didn't want to talk that day. Marc was gracious, patient, and worked with me to try everything. We completed the interview, but due to problems outside our control, about half the recording was unusable. We reconnected a couple times in the weeks since the original recording to try again. Marc jumped through all the hoops with me, tweaked settings, downloaded different apps, tried this, tried that, and tried them all again. Still, for whatever reason, our devices would not cooperate. So, under a time crunch, we were finally able to connect over Zoom this past Friday. The recording quality wasn't as good as usual, and we had to rush through the second half of the interview, but Marc was infinitely patient, gracious, and invested far more time in this conversation than we just heard, and I want to state publicly how much I appreciate that. As a U.S. Senate candidate, his time is precious, and he easily could have blown me off. I see in Marc the kind of old-school, bipartisan, handshaking, backslapping, sit down with anyone and come to a consensus kind of politician. And on one hand, that's exactly how politics should work, right? A good faith, respectful argument between opponents, not enemies. Just an incredibly genial guy. Midwest nice, Hoosier hospitality. Can work across the aisle. Somebody you'd like to sit down and have a beer with. I'm just deeply afraid that the time for those kind of politics may have passed, and Carmichael wouldn't find many like-minded Republicans to sit down with in our current age of polarization. And wasted beer makes me sad. Dr. McCrae, on the other hand, well, if nothing else, she can certainly identify the pathologies afflicting the MAGA horde across the aisle. Now, I don't know if she and I fully threaded this needle during our conversation in the last episode, but one thing she understands is that the last 40 to 50 years of all-out, unregulated neoliberal capitalism is tantamount to decades of psychological abuse directed at the entire population. And here, I will cite an article by Anna Ziera, published in Community Mental Health Journal in 2022. Quote, over the past decade, several economists, journalists, sociologists, and mental health practitioners have posited that the increases in mental illness and distress are due to neoliberal economic policies and ideologies. In his book, The Selfish Capitalist, psychologist Oliver James found that twice as many people suffer from emotional distress in the English-speaking nations that have adapted neoliberal capitalist policies when compared to people in the Western European nations which did not. He also notes the rapid increase in emotional distress in the United States since the 1980s, when the country began to implement neoliberal policies such as eliminating restrictions on the trade market and cutting social services. Economic policies such as deregulation of industry and decreased public sector spending starting in the 1980s have spawned wealth inequality, mass incarceration, and job insecurity, which all can contribute to emotional distress. Additionally, economic and social policies created a change in ideology favoring individualism, materialism, and competitiveness, which are not compatible with human needs such as social connection and community, leading to anxiety and depression. Furthermore, through poor access to mental health care due to the for-profit healthcare system and the medicalization of emotional distress due to the rise of biological psychiatry, how we treat mental illness in the United States has also contributed to rising rates of anxiety and depression. End quote. Again, both of these Democrats represent a drastic improvement over the extremist banks. Let's send one of them to Washington this November and begin to tackle the mental health crisis that is unrestrained capital. And if we can't, well, I'll take that beer. Thanks for listening. Thank you to my guest today, Marc Carmichael. Find him at www.markforindiana.com. That's Mark with a C. As for me, you can find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at HoosLeft, and on most other social media sites at ScottRodge78. If you want to reach me, send me a DM on the socials or email me at scottrodge78@gmail.com. If you haven't yet done so, when you're finished here, please go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. Help me keep this project going. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.